Hi guys, this is Eric with the Film Photography channel. Let's take a look at the Nikon FE. Alright, and this is the Nikon FE, and you know how you can tell that? Because it says absolutely nothing on the front plate here. Where it does actually tell you it's an FE is on the back. That was pretty typical for Nikon when they came out with these first in the line of these F series compact cameras, which is what they call this. They call this the F series semi-professional compact cameras. This would be the FE, the FM, and the FA series, and so on. The FM didn't have any nomenclature on the front either. This is a well-made camera. Nikon sold it from 1978 to 1983. It's let's contrast it just to get started here. Take a look at it versus the F3, my beloved F3 here, and you can see that big chunky viewfinder on the F3. The body overall is bigger, and you can kind of see the difference there. The F3 is a full-blown professional camera. They sold this body, the same basic body, for 28 plus years, and it's just a different type of camera. This one is much lighter. It's a Semi Pro. It's still a system camera. It's got a removable back and some nice components that you can add to it, but it's not anywhere near on the level in terms of that professional use as the F3 is. But a nice camera in its right for most people that want like something above just like a basic camera, and this camera is well above that. Now let's just go over the body. First of all, you've got this gorgeous huge viewfinder in here. It's every bit as big as like on the F3 or even the F6. It's a huge viewfinder. It's really surprising given the compact size of this camera. On the left side of the viewfinder, you'll see an analog scale from top to bottom. It's got all your shutter speeds, and it's got a thicker translucent green needle that when you're using the camera manually, it'll line up with whatever shutter speed you set here on your dial. And there's a second skinny black needle which moves with your aperture dial. That's called the match needle system. What happens is these two needles, you know, say you set your shutter speed here, and then you start turning your aperture dial, and what you want to do is get the needles to match to each other, and then it's just that simple. I mean, you can really run and gun with that system. You can just go, shoot, no problem, because it's just, you know, given that the scale is there, you can see where you're headed, since it's an analog system versus a digital system. Like the F3, for example, has got a single little tiny window that shows you what your readout is for your shutter speed or you know, what have you. And you know, it's analog. The analog scale is just a lot more intuitive, a lot easier to use. The one advantage the F3 does have in the viewfinder is that it does light up that little window. There's a little button on the F3 that lights up that window, so you can actually see it in a darker situation where there's really no way to see this thing if it gets too dark. If you're indoors or whatever, it's kind of hard to see. So you just gotta, you know, go with your intuition. If you put it on the auto mode, the green auto mode right there, then the green needle jumps up out of the way to let you know you're in auto, right? And from that point, you start turning your aperture ring, and it'll let you know what shutter speed the camera intends on using. So again, it's really intuitive, really easy to use. I prefer it actually over the F3, although I prefer the F3 as a camera overall because I just really like the engineering, and it is an easy camera to use as well. Neither camera slows me down, but you know, at the end of the day, this is a more intuitive system. If that makes any sense. I still like the F3 better. So the top plate is absolutely lovely. You can see the engineering with really nice dials and buttons and bells and whistles. Right here, there's your ASA dial, as you can see. Now, in order to set your ASA, you hold down that button and you move your dial thusly. So you pull out on this dial and then you rotate it. You can see the little index there for your exposure compensation setting. This is your TTL contact. This is your hot shoe, flash hot shoe. As you can see, these cameras had a lovely leather or vulcanite, whatever it is, on the top, which was a nice touch. Really gave it a unique look in the market. I prefer the silver body because it shows off this black top a lot better than the black on black. It doesn't stand out quite as much. Here's your shutter speed dial. This camera goes to 1/1000th of a second. with the M90, which is a manual 90, because this is a fully electronic camera. It needs the battery in order for it to activate the shutter and to use the meter. So the M90 is a manual setting in case you end up with dead batteries. Not very likely, because these batteries last for years. Literally, 1 or 2 years is easily expected. There's your auto setting. This is an aperture priority camera, so you put it on auto, and you set your aperture, of course, on the lens ring there, and the camera will select the shutter speed for you. The flash sync speed on this camera is 1/125th, which is pretty good. It'll go as low as 8 seconds and up to 1/1000th of a second. Now, some of the other cameras in this line will hit actually 1/4000th of a second. The F3 itself, which I just showed you, hits 1/2000th of a second. Not a big showstopper to me. I've never really run into a situation where I absolutely have to have something faster than 1/1000th. There's your film counter window, and this right here is what I'll nickname as the world's worst double exposure lever. And the way that works is, you can see here, let's see, take a photo, hold this down, take a look, keep your eye on the film advance, or the film counter window. As I advance the film in a really awkward way there, you'll see that the film counter didn't advance. It stayed where it was. Let's try that again. As long as you're holding that little lever and advancing the film at the same time, and the film advance lever goes on top of the double exposure lever, so it makes it a little awkward to operate, but it actually does work. All right, so that's the top plate. Let's take a look at the back here. This is your film reminder holder. You put the end of the box of your film inside there to kind of remind you where you're at or what type of film you're using. This is your battery check button right here, and failed to mention that this turns off the meter and locks the shutter, so you don't take a picture by accident. When you tuck in the film advance lever, and the little red dot lets you know that you're live, you're ready to go. And this little guy right here, all that does is indicate to you where the film plane is. All right, so going back to the back here, again, nice engineering, pretty well made. Everything's pretty straightforward. On the bottom, what Nikon did is they did away with they used to have like a cover for the motor drive that you would take off, and it would expose the innards of the camera pretty badly, so it would be subject to dust. So what they did is they sealed it, and they did away with the film cover. So when you connect the motor drive, the film, the automatic motor drive to this, it's already coupled without having to remove any caps at all. And same thing for the contacts over here. And this is just a hole to line up your motor drive. This is your battery cover, and this is your tripod socket. It's a metal threaded tripod socket, and it's lined up with the center of the lens as it's supposed to be. Okay, so that's the bottom. And just to look real quick at the lens here, like most Nikkor lenses, they'll have your depth of field scale, your aperture ring, and they have these tiny little numbers right there. You can see just right there, those are your f-stops in a tiny form there, so it can be seen inside the pentaprism here. There's a window here right at the bottom under that K on Nikon that looks onto the lens to let you know what your f-stop is. Okay, and just another thing, and this is common with all the lenses, that's why I'm mentioning it. Right there, of course, you see your depth of field scale, and in the center there you see your focusing index. That lets you know where you're focused, of course. But if you look really closely, there's a tiny little dot next to that focus index, and that's your infrared film focusing index. That tiny little dot there, that lets you know where you need to focus if you're using infrared films. In other words, you focus for, using your viewfinder, and you focus normally, and then you look outside of your viewfinder onto the lens itself, and then you adjust your focus just a little bit for that infrared dot. Let's take a quick look at the front of the camera. Right here is your typical self-timers, pretty standard stuff for cameras of this era. One thing the self-timer does, it's got a couple of different functions. Well, actually, before I show you the other function, of course, it's a self-timer, and if you decide that you cock the self-timer and you don't need it, you can just push it back, and the self-timer will, unwind itself without ever actually taking the photo. Okay, and you'll hear no click there. So it did not take the photo. And of course, if you want to use it normally, you just push down on that, and then the self-timer, after, from 8 to 14-second delay, it'll go ahead and take the photo like it's designed to do. Here's your depth of field lever. I'll mention that real quick. But going back to the self-timer here, when you push it in towards the body, what that does is it holds your exposure. It's an exposure lock. Okay? To explain this Nikon exposure lock a little bit, it's kind of odd the way they did it on the FE. So you press the self-timer lever towards the body, right? Okay, so what you do is, if, for example, you want to expose for shadows or something like that in a high contrast scene, so I'll show you. So you push it in as you're, finding what you want to expose for. All right, so I pushed it in. I exposed for a fairly dark corner right there. I'm going to point it towards this LED light that's frying my brains clearly, and let's see what we hear. So you see how that's a really slow shutter speed, probably about a half a second, and obviously I'm pointing it towards this bright LED. It should be, like this. It should be, like a thousandth of a second or something like that. But what's tricky about that, though, is that it doesn't really let you know that your exposure is locked. When you lock exposure, the needle will continue to move, which seems counterintuitive, but if you really think about it, that's kind of helpful, because if I'm locking for something, I just kind of have to make note that, okay, that thing that I just exposed for is 1/50th of a second. And now when I go back to compose, now my needle is telling me I'm at 1/125th of a second. So you're going from 1/50th to 1/125th. And that'll give you the information you need in case you... So that gives you the information you need to, so what the difference is between what you're actually exposing for initially and what your scene exposure reading would be. So that's really helpful. Initially, it did seem counterintuitive to me, because you think when you lock exposure, the needle should stop moving. It should let you know you're locked, but just the opposite is the case. And it's a really smart system, because as you're continuing to review your scene and compose your shot, you have more information that says, okay, this is where you're at now with this particular exposure. Okay, so I'll mention just a couple last little things. To open the film back, I'll just show you real quick. You gotta slide over that little lever, and then you pull up. It's pretty standard stuff. The shutter here, you can see the reflection off the shutter. It's not a titanium shutter, but Nikon just calls it a metal shutter. I know they use titanium for the really fast the 1/4000th and 1/8000th capable cameras. It's a vertically traveling shutter. I don't know if you could tell by that or not, but anyway, it's a vertically traveling shutter, which means it goes up and down like this. There's a series of blades in there, and it just moves up and down like this, versus the cloth curtains that go from side to side. You kind of wind them into a spool, and that you really can't. You can't see it. There's a spool inside there, and the horizontal traveling cloth curtain shutters move like that. So that's a little bit of an advancement that Nikon, when they started going with these metal shutters. This film back is removable. There's a little tab right here that allows you to remove the film back in case you want to use like a data back. The data backs would actually have these series of dials, and not, sometimes an LCD display that would imprint the date and the time and other information onto your film. The F6 did it really right, as far as if you want to print information on your film, because the F6 actually lets you print between the frames and not ruin your frame with the date and time and whatever data on the film, on the picture itself. So that's probably a little bit better way to do it. I recommend the FE over the FE2 for a couple of reasons. The FE allows you to start taking photos right away as soon as you load it, and close the door, advance it once. You can get 38, 39 frames from this. The FE2 and some of the other Nikons will default to a 1/250th shutter speed when you initially load them for 3 frames. So you can't take photos right away. You got to literally advance it 3 frames before it starts metering, and will let you start taking photos that you know what the metering is on them. So that's one reason. The other reason is the price. You can get one of these for like $100, a nice clean one. This one's pretty minty. You can get it for like $100 on eBay, and you're really getting the same camera as the FE2, or really the same as most of those Nikons. And the money you save, you can spend on some good glass. Okay, for $100, this is a lot of camera. It's a much better camera than, say, like a Pentax K1000, or some of those entry-level cameras that people recommend for beginners. It's a step above entry level. It's a really refined, well-made camera. It's fun to use. You feel like you're using a well-engineered piece of equipment. It doesn't have that that crazy mirror slap like a lot of these cheaper cameras do. You can feel the mirror actually moving the camera ever so slightly as you're taking the photos. So I do like that that you don't have to deal with that. And again, you've got the luxury of having all these beautiful Nikon lenses available to you, and that's really, at the end of the day, what's most important to your photography, and is the glass. Yeah, so for $100, it's a lot of camera. The FE2 is literally about double that, and maybe a little bit more than twice as much, and it offers a 1/4000th of a second shutter speed, which is really not a big deal unless you're using you're pushing your film to 3200 in broad daylight and you want to be at 1.2, then maybe you'll need it. But other than that, and you may be doing that for some reason, not downing that, but other than that, 1/1000th more than gets the job done. Okay, guys, so just to wrap it up, take a look at some of the photos I've taken with this camera over the years. This is my 3rd FE. I've had, my 2nd FE, I did have an FE2. They're fun cameras to use. They're easy. They get out of your way. That the match needle system works extremely well. So I highly recommend go get a Nikon FE.